This is session 112, sponsored by UNFPA on civil registration and vital statistics. And we would like to welcome you to this session on modern approaches to vital statistics production, dissemination, and usage to harness civil registration data to advance population health and gender equality. This research leadership session is organized and sponsored by the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. The session will showcase recent work developed at UNFPA through the Converge initiative. Converge stands for Connecting Vital Event Registration and Gender Equality, and supports efforts to advance gender-sensitive and gender-transformative civil registration and vital statistics systems in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Arab states. For more information on this work through the Converge initiative by UNFPA and the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems, please do take a look at the 2020 Global Converge conference materials on the CRVS and gender available. Ramesh, you are giving the link?
I just posted it.
Thank you. As we will see from the three presentations today, UNFPA Converge initiative takes a deliberate life course approach to CRVS system strengthening, engaging vital events across the life course from birth to death, including marriage and divorce. Our three presentations reflect this life course approach. The first presentation by Ramesh Silva and Alexandra Robinson reviews how birth registration data can be better utilized to understand gender-biased sex selection and the phenomenon of son preference. The second presentation by Emmanuel Souza reviews the understudied area of marriage and divorce registration and assesses the status of marriage registration data, what we know about its completeness and quality, and current good practices in the production and dissemination of nuptiality and divorce statistics by the National Statistical Offices. The third and final paper presents collaborative work by technical staff at the Institut National de la Santé Publique in Tunisia and UNFPA, which applies demographic analysis to understand the completeness and quality of death registration data and cause of death information in Tunisia. Our discussant today is Jenny Garcia from INED in Paris. So let me encourage all the participants to post their questions and comments through the session using the chat window in Zoom. This will help us to organize and moderate the Q&A session at the end. Please note that the simultaneous translation between French and English is available. Now let's get started. First with our first presentation with Ramesh from UNFPA on this first topic that we just discussed. Ramesh, the floor is yours.
You are muted, Ramesh. You are muted.
Okay, sorry. Can you see full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Patrick mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about demographic assessment of some components of gender-biased sex selection, and in particular, going to focus on some of the opportunities, but also the challenges that this poses for civil registration and vital statistics systems. And this is work done jointly with Alexandra Robinson at UNFPA headquarters and through the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems. So gender-biased sex selection and son preference in some recent work done by UNFPA jointly with Christophe Giamotto and colleagues. We've estimated that there's about 141 million estimated missing females between 1970 and 2020. This graph on the left-hand side shows that this phenomenon is heavily concentrated in the two largest countries in the world. And the schematic on the right is unpacking the some of the contextual factors, particularly in the blue color, which really drive gender bias sex selection, the shift towards low fertility contexts, and the increased availability of modern technologies in terms of sex screening of the fetus, and a normative preference for male children. And further, what a lot of the work, particularly at UNFPA, has been doing is building on this demographic work and coupling it with more a more holistic approach to understanding how these contextual factors interact with structural inequalities, the low status of women and girls in particular societies, and social and gender norms. This talk is really grounded in a realization about the heavy reliance on census, survey, and sample data systems in studying skewed sex ratios at birth. Here on the left-hand side, you see a map of Vietnam showing the sex ratio of last births using the latest census data in Vietnam. What this provides is a very helpful snapshot of skewed sex ratios at birth and where they're heavily concentrated geospatially in Vietnam. And this is emblematic of a number of country studies and published research in the field, which focuses heavily on survey and census data. And then on the right-hand side, we see a recent study by Feng-Ming Chow, Shimamoto, and colleagues using data from India, detailed household survey data and sample registration data. What they look at is a fairly coarse comparison between 1990 and 2016 sex ratios at birth across states and union territories of India. Again, here, heavy reliance on sample registration and survey data. And then when we move to the multi-country work, this is work fairly recently published by Feng-Ming Chow, combining many different data sources across the world. What I'm showing you here is what the model-based estimates look like in relation to the underlying data points here for India, Republic of Korea, and Montenegro. On the far left, you see India, where there's a substantial, the thick red line is showing the point model-based estimates, and the red shading is showing the statistical uncertainty, the measurement uncertainty there. And then these multicolored points, which are bouncing up and down from year to year, are largely household survey data. If you shift your eyes over to the middle box, you see for Republic of Korea, between about the mid-1980s onwards, there are a number of black dots every year, and these are the vital registration, the birth registration data. And we should note that as birth registration data became more and more available in South Korea, the precision of the estimates and the analysis became much more refined. But unfortunately, the point here is that most of the model-based estimates from this type of work are really informed by sample registration systems, household surveys, and census. And so what we see is really an absence of civil registration data impeding the monitoring of short-term changes in the sex ratio at birth, and an over-reliance on household survey data impeding localized geographic monitoring. And so the point of this paper is to emphasize how civil registration data can offer a multi-dimensional framework for the measurement of the sex ratio at birth, looking at the variability from conception and also at birth itself. And our work is really grounded in the United Nations principles and recommendations for vital statistics systems, recognizing that civil registration is a continuous, permanent, and is intended to be a universal system. These systems are country-owned and country-led, and they're widely recognized. In terms of vital statistics, civil registration are widely recognized as the preferred source of vital statistics. Here is some recent work that we've done at UNFPA to better understand how the sex ratio at birth for birth orders 3 and higher has shifted over time in the Republic of Georgia, and also shifted geospatially. So as you can see, what we've done is we've clustered the data by 3-year, by groupings of 3 years. And we can see the darker red shading is showing the highly skewed sex ratios at birth, and the lighter orange colors, the more the lower sex ratios at birth. And here, this is a very informative and helpful diagnostic tool to help us really understand the clustered nature of skewed sex ratios at birth and gender biased sex selection. But there are real challenges here in terms of harnessing civil registration data to monitor gender biased sex selection. I'm going to harp on 3 particular ones which we've been working on quite a bit and are ramping up our work on in the coming years. First is the under-registration of births. Second, the lack of a culture of vital statistics production, dissemination, and usage. And the third is complications due to delays in birth registration. So firstly, this table shows you the 14 or so countries with highly skewed sex ratios at birth. The middle column is showing you Eastern Europe and Central Asia countries, and the right-hand column, Asia Pacific countries. And what we can see is that although in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, we have a number of countries with essentially complete birth registration data, for a number of, for more than half of the countries that were, gender bias sex selection is a major issue, we lack complete and detailed civil registration data. I note here on the right-hand side, both for China and India, but visually here in India, I'm just showing you that although the birth registration data is well below 95% nationally, there's wide variation across India, Indian states and territories. So there's a number of areas where there are good quality birth registration and good quality sample registration as well in India. So first point is that incomplete birth registration is hampering our ability to really understand this phenomenon in at least half of the countries where this is a major phenomenon. Secondly, there's really an uneven culture of vital statistics production, dissemination, and usage. This graph is showing you the availability of sex ratio at birth data by different data source types between 1976 and 2019. These data are compiled from the United Nations Demographic Yearbook and also a very detailed database constructed by Feng-Ming Chow and colleagues. As you can see, the dark blue shading is showing where for in this multi-decade period where birth registration data is readily available for the entire period. But what we see is for many countries in the Asia Pacific, there's heavy reliance on sample registration data. For example, in India and in China, a lot of reliance on administrative data sources other than birth registration. And in many other countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, more reliance on survey data. Further, there's been a substantial uneven culture in vital statistics production, dissemination, and usage. On the left-hand side here, I'm showing you the standard, the minimum list of live birth tabulations, which are outlined in the United Nations Principles and Recommendations for Vital Statistics Systems. There's 20 really basic vital statistics tabulations. I'm highlighting LB9, the 9th recommended tabulation, which recommends tabulation by disaggregated by usual residence, age of mother, sex of the child, and live birth order. Here on the right-hand side, I'm showing that for many countries, this this more detailed data disaggregated by sex and live birth order is not available through national statistics, readily available through national statistics offices. And so again, a real limitation in understanding the nature of the phenomenon through the best available official data. And thirdly, one needs to worry about delayed registration in certain places. There's been an active debate in recent years about the nature of missing women and girls, which has been estimated to be almost 14 million women and girls in the intercensal period between 1990 and the last census in 2010. And the question here is whether this is an actual, these women and girls are actually missing, or whether this is an administrative complication or some confluence of both actuality and administrative and failure of administrative data systems. She and Kennedy in some recent work estimated that around 73% of the observed sex ratio at birth is due to delayed registration. Here on the right-hand side, I'm showing you a graph of the 1990 Chinese birth cohort. I beg your pardon. Oops. Trouble going. Yeah, and as you can see in successive censuses, we see in 1990 and 2000 a very skewed sex ratio at birth, and then all of a sudden in 2010, the sex ratio of the 1990 birth cohort normalizing. And subsequent researchers have identified that children born in violation of the one-child policy had lower rates of registration in the hukou household registration in China. And then more recently, recent analysis of the Chinese census data from 2010 suggests that there's been a policy response by in terms of the Chinese statistics law, which really encouraged hukou registration of children born in violation of the one-child policy to ensure the quality and the completeness of the 2010 census. But I want to also, in closing, emphasize that the sex ratio at birth is only one important dimension of gender bias sex selection. Rohini Pandey, in recent writings in The Lancet, has really called attention to this. There's a long history here which spans many factors, from female infanticide right through to excess female child mortality, and these pieces are rooted in discrimination in relation to health, nutrition, schooling, and lifetime opportunities. And so here I'm showing you key minimum standards in terms of vital statistics tabulations, not just in live births, but also in terms of infant deaths, fetal deaths, and both live births and fetal deaths together. And so here, one of our key pieces of work at UNFPA is to build a stronger culture in the routine production by national statistics officers of these types of tabulations. And we see this as a real opportunity to leverage civil registration systems for more detailed and comprehensive monitoring of gender bias sex selection. In particular, this is really part of a whole of system approach, which integrates not just civil registration data, but also household survey data and census data and geo-referenced information as well. So I'll stop there and really look forward to questions and comments. Thanks so much. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ramesh. Now we'll go to our second speaker, who is Emmanuel Souza, who is going to cover marriage and divorce registration. Emmanuel.
Thank you very much. My presentation is about marriage registration and vital statistics, answering the question, where are we and where to from here? In line with target 16.9 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which calls for legal identity for all by 2030, the United Nations emphasizes on a life course approach to civil registration. There is no legal identity for all without the registration of marriages and divorces. Why? Because registration of marriage and divorces is interlinked with obtaining other legal identification documents, such as birth certificates for kids. Also, Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which concerns gender equality and women's empowerment, marriage and divorce registration, in this case, is critical in ensuring gender equality and women's empowerment. For instance, registration of marriages and divorces enables women to access property and inheritance rights, access alimony and child custody. It also prevents unlawful marriages and divorces. In addition, marriage and divorce registration provides data for measurement of reliable, continuous, and universal nationality statistics. But what are the challenges of marriage and divorce registration, especially when you look at completeness assessment? Unlike births and deaths, registration of marriages and divorces has received less attention, and the COVID-19 pandemic has probably stalled the little progress that was being made. But why is it that marriage and divorce registration receive little attention compared to births and deaths? First, marriage and of course divorce are social constructs and not biological events. The definition of these differs across countries due to differences in traditional and social customs, and also religious beliefs. This makes measurement of marriages and divorces somewhat difficult. In particular, when estimating nationality statistics, unlike fertility and mortality, the at-risk population is not easily identifiable. Consequently, because completeness assessment requires the number of expected marriages or divorces as the denominator, while the numerator is the actual number of registered marriages or divorces in the from the CRVS system, the estimation of the denominator itself is not that straightforward. And finally, there is a mismatch between the laws governing marriages and marriage practices in several countries, whereby some marriages are not legally recognized in some countries. So what is the current knowledge on levels of marriage and divorce registration? Because many developing countries do not prioritize marriage and divorce registration, it is impossible to use direct measures to estimate completeness levels using CRVS data. Instead, the best bet is to use indirect means using questions about the registration of marriages and divorces in censuses or surveys. In the slides that follows, I will present results from an analysis using data from countries presented in this table, which collected marriage registration data in the 2010 round of censuses. These are a select group of countries which we were able to access data from IPAM's website. There are some countries that collected similar data, but we are not yet able to access those data. So in this analysis, we have countries like Armenia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ghana, and Kyrgyzstan. This figure shows country differentials in levels of marriage registration, shown here by vertical dotted lines, which ranges from as low as 52% in Cuba at the bottom left corner, to as high as 96% in Armenia at the top right corner. It also highlights within country differences shown by the dots, which shows large differences by geographical regions, especially in countries where national averages are very low, such as Cuba, Brazil, and Costa Rica. This figure shows marriage registration differences by age groups. Here, for all countries, there are huge differences by age groups, with older cohorts having higher levels of marriage registration than younger cohorts. In addition, the figures show two country groupings here, those with high and those with low national registration levels. Comparing the two groups, registration is extremely low in the young to middle adult age groups for countries that have low registration levels, such as Brazil, Cuba, and Costa Rica, compared to countries with high registration levels, Armenia and Ghana. So, and finally, this figure presents logistical regression results for the likelihood of marriage registration. You can see that several factors in this figure are associated with marriage registration. If you look at the significant levels shown at the right-hand side of the figure. However, I will only highlight one or two factors here. Education level particularly stands out. In each country, tertiary education is a very strong predictor of marriage registration. The odds ratios here range from about 2.4 in Armenia to about 4 in Ghana. Also in Armenia and Ghana, but of course more so in Armenia, zero parity is also associated with low likelihood of registering a marriage. And in Costa Rica, foreign national status and not owning a dwelling is also associated with low levels of marriage registration. But what are the determinants of marriage under registration? The determinants of marriage or divorce registration can be grouped into two, the supply side factors and the demand side factors. On the supply side, issues of marriage laws not recognizing other forms of marriages in countries prevents people from registering their marriages. Similarly, prohibitive legal requirements such as the need for registration fees discourages people to register their marriages. Again, if registration centers are not accessible to people in remote areas, it hinders marriage registration, especially traditional marriages. On the demand side, lack of knowledge about civil registration of marriages also leads to low levels of registration, especially for women in customary and Muslim marriages. Again, the importance of religious and other civil registration reduces, let me take that again. The importance of religious and cultural rituals over civil registration reduces the likelihood of marriage registration. Forced migration also leads to loss of property and household income, which may complicate the process of marriage or divorce registration at destination, especially the loss of identity documents, because the registration of marriages and divorces will also require the possession of other legal identity documents such as birth certificates. Let's look at some of the good practices in officiality vital statistics. In low and middle income countries, many countries face challenges in producing and disseminating vital statistics routinely. These challenges are especially pronounced for marriage and divorce statistics based on civil registration data. However, there are some notable good practices in some diverse parts of the world. For example, here in Mexico publishes marriage registration data and vital statistics based on persons above 12 years of age, which allows for the analysis of child or early marriages. And also it disaggregates their marriage data by both same-sex marriages and heterosexual marriages. Philippines and South Africa publish quality statistics based on marriage or divorce registration by type of marriages, such as customary marriages, civil, religious, and other tribal marriages. Jordan has made available a long series of marriage and divorce registration data for the last 15 years, including disaggregation by nationality and the groom's occupation status. These heat maps show marriage and divorce registration data availability for all UN member states over the last 10-year period from the year 2009 to 2018. These are categorized by the 6 UN NFPA regions of the world. These heat maps show that marriage and divorce registration data was more available in Latin America and Eastern Europe, and also in Central Asian states. Whereas in Africa and Asian Pacific, marriages or divorce registration was only sparsely available. For example, only one country in West and Central Africa routinely disseminates divorce registration data out of the 23 countries in this region. In summary, marriage and divorce registration is integral for the life course approach to civil registration. However, in comparison with birth and death registration, marriage and divorce registration has received little attention in many low and middle income countries. Direct methods of assessing completeness of marriage registration are not straightforward due to conceptual challenges and legal shortfalls in marriage and divorce registration. Instead, indirect methods using census questions about marriage and divorce registration are commonly used, although they are also subject to error. So results from census data show huge variations by geographical region and by age group, as we have shown in our slides, especially among countries with low national averages in marriage registration. And finally, although marriage and divorce registration gets less attention across low and middle income countries, some countries are able to produce these statistics. And there are notable good practices in some parts of the world, which we have highlighted. However, it is important to advocate for continued inclusion of questions on marriage and divorce registration in future rounds of censuses, of which UNFPA is continuously pushing for, because most of these countries lack functioning civil registration systems. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Now we are going to move to the third presentation by Soumaya Taibi from Tunisia about the experience in Tunisia with civil registration and vital statistics, especially focusing on deaths. Soumaya.
Hello, everyone. Our paper assesses death registration completeness and quality, both in terms of overall completeness and cause of death certification. We use recent data from Tunisia covering the period between 2013 and 2020. This is joint work by UNFPA colleagues and colleagues from the National Health Institute. It's collaboration through the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems as part of the Converge initiative, connecting vital events registration and gender equality. Our research objective is to assess the completeness of death registration and cause of death certification in Tunisia from 2013 to 2020, with specific focuses on subnational geographic disparities and sex differences. First, we assess death registration completeness by applying death distribution methods to the Tunisian data for the intercensal period from 2004 to 2014. As you can see, the majority of our estimates are above the 100% mark. This is unlikely due to a double count of deaths, but could be attributed to some of the DDM's assumptions not being met. Our summary measure is the harmonic mean of the three DDMs. It's around 100% for females and 103% for males. Such results suggest that death registration in Tunisia between 2004 and 2014 is complete. To assess subnational death registration completeness, we use the Adair-Lopez empirical method. As depicted in the graph, there is a systemic improvement across all of Tunisia's governorates. This improvement is significant, with increases by more than 10% for Jendouba and Qasrim. Furthermore, in 2017, all of the subnational estimates are above 90% mark. To assess the cause of death certification, we have to look at the whole process that starts with death notification. Family is responsible for this step, and they have to provide a medical certificate of cause of death if the death is natural, and a judicial permission of burial if the death is unnatural. The municipality registers death and transfers the medical certificate of death to the National Institute of Health. The institute then proceeds to cause of death coding, data entry, and statistical analysis. There are several issues in this process. First, there is the complete loss of information of unnatural deaths, as it is not transferred to the National Health Institute. Second, cause of death is not properly captured. This is due to the use of garbage codes, not recording age and sex information on the death certificate, and only recording the immediate cause of death and not all of the events leading to the death. There are also issues regarding the transfer of the medical death certificate from the municipality to the National Health Institute. In 2020, 40% of death certificates were not transferred. And from the certificates that were transferred, 6.8% lacked the medical section, and another 6.8% lacked the administrative section. The administrative section contains, among other information, the sex and the age of the deceased. When we look at the completeness of cause of death certification for registered deaths, we see a notable improvement from 2017 to 2020. In 2017, estimates for both female and male are around 38%, and in 2020, they are both above 54%. We also observe a sex difference between male and female completeness, but we cannot make any conclusions due to the high share of death certificates for which the sex of the deceased is not specified. In 2020, 9% of cause of death data lacked the sex information, and 14% of cause of death data lacked age information. On the subnational level, there is an overall improvement in completeness of cause of death certification. However, this improvement is not uniform across the governorates. It ranges from 0% to 92%. And there are 3 governorates for which completeness decreased from 2017 to 2020. We also observed that the minimum completeness estimate for 2017 was 0%. This estimate improves in 2020 as the minimal completeness by governorate is 15%. We disaggregate the subnational estimates by sex, and we can see some sex differences that reach 10%. However, the estimates do not show persistently higher values for one sex over the other. Therefore, we cannot make any conclusions regarding the sex difference in completeness of cause of death certification. To assess the quality of cause of death certification, we measure the share of garbage codes. We use the typology provided by Anaconda. Anaconda is an electronic tool developed by the University of Melbourne. And we can see that from 2013 to 2020, females are attributed higher garbage codes than males. There is a persistent sex difference in cause of death quality certification. When we classify those garbage codes according to their severity, we see that more than 25% of the garbage codes used have very high consequences on correctly measuring the patterns of cause of death in the population. On the subnational level, we can see that the share of garbage codes varies from a governorate to another, ranging from 41% in Sfax to 75% in Tozeur. When we disaggregate those estimates by sex, we observe in the 2020 data that there is a persistent sex difference in most of the governorates. This sex difference reaches a maximum of 19% in Zawen. Finally, we classify the governorates according to their level of completeness and quality, following Peralta and Dole approach from the 2019 paper on Ecuador. We use 70% as completeness threshold and the national level as a threshold for the share of garbage codes. We can see a notable improvement from 2013 to 2020, but still we have 9 governorates in 2020 that are deficient in both quality and completeness. To conclude, we estimate death registration completeness in Tunisia is above 95%, with no measurable sex differences nor subnational disparities. Completeness of cause of death certification in Tunisia increased from 38% in 2013 to 61% in 2020. Yet this improvement is not uniform geographically. Regarding the quality of cause of death certification, in 2020, 50% of causes were registered using garbage codes, 14% with missing age, and 9% with missing sex. There is a persistent sex difference in data quality on the national level throughout the studied period between 2013 and 2020, with higher garbage codes attributed to female deaths. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this third presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to Jenny Garcia, our discussant of these three presentations. Jenny.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this session for the invitation to discuss these three exciting presentations. As mentioned in the session abstract, the papers take a life course approach to CRVS and use a gender lens to analyze data, completeness, and their usage to advance population health and gender equality. So the first presentation reviews challenge and progress in using birth registration data to understand gender-biased sex selection. One of Ramesh and Alexandra's conclusion is that overcoming late registration of birth will improve the usefulness of this data to monitoring gender-biased sex selection, especially at subnational levels where policies can be deployed. So as stated in the presentation, late registration may account for as much as 73% of the observed skewed sex ratio in China. I wonder which challenge and recommendations the authors could give to overcome this issue to the country. So some simple strategy could reduce the time lag of the registration process. For example, promoting the change in the minor administrative unit where the event must be officially registered if the usual place of residence or permanent place of residence could make a difference. Simplifying the required documentation, for example, allowing this way to children born out of the wedlock of children born in religious marriage couple, single mothers, or within the second or third union in countries where polygamy is illegally practiced to be registered. So it means avoiding a mandatory presentation of the parents' marriage certificate, if this could be also a strategy to improve the registration. Another strategy could be implementing a two-step registration process, as in Kosovo, for example. The country implemented online kiosks to enable the civil registration of events, which allowed citizens to quickly report and obtain a legal pre-certificate. So in this way, the event is already reported. Also promoting the registration of birth at free of charge, because sometimes even when it's free legally, low fees are unofficially demanded in some countries to cover paper-based form or the fill out of this form, particularly in rural areas. Other example is that some countries also set penalties for late registration, and fines are imposed when event registration is done with delay. I don't know, what do you think? But I wonder if a policy based on incentive rather than penalties could be more efficient in this sense. So, well, this is for the first paper. The second paper reviewed the understudy area of marriage and divorce registration. And as Emmanuel pointed out, that marriage and divorce registration have received less attention in comparison with birth and death registration. And that also for measuring the statistic and completeness, there is no straightforward method due to the definitional and legal challenge linked to the concept of marriage and divorce. So as Emmanuel said, the mismatch between marriage law and marriage practice in several countries may be one of the main obstacles to collect this statistic. And we can see that it's true that in some countries, no reported marriage might hide factual polygamy and underage marriage from the data. However, causality is quite heterogeneous because for some countries, traditional marriage practice may not require legal marriage registration, or simply the predominant arrangement rely on cohabitation and extended family structure. So marriage as a social construction is not relevant. So this introduced difficulties to count under registration of marriage, because as in strictly legal term, there is no undercount. So in some cases, the first child birth is what set the time for legal marriage, especially if the civil registration office demand the parents to present the marriage certificate as a requirement and force in this way the legalization of a union. So in addition to this definitional and legal challenge, measuring the incompleteness of marriage statistic also depend on the registration process itself, because the role of the civil registration office vary among countries. For example, the marriage ceremony could be directly performed and certified by a civil registration official in one-step procedure. Or instead, it could be that the marriage ceremony can be performed by religious authority or notaries, and later on the certificate issued during the ceremony is registered at the civil registry office. So this difference introduced a clear definition of what could be considered marriage on the registration. There should not be marriage on the registration in the first case, my first example, in the one-step procedure. And in the second case of two-step procedure, marriage on the registration is the difference between the ceremony performed and the register. Also, direct cause of marriage or the demand of medical exams by the medical examination by the civil registration office also affect the decision of legalize or not a union. So in this sense, I wonder if Emmanuel could tell us a bit about the limitation of the marriage rate estimation from census, especially because the number comes exclusively from respondent declaration, and the wording of the question and the social stereotypes linked to cohabitation could be affecting the answer directly to do comparison among the countries. So I did not quite understand if Emmanuel estimated marriage rate using age ratio of legal marriage, all kind of marriage considered as legal in each country, to all form of unions. So legal marriage, religious cohabitation, all declared, or in the census, or if there was a precise question on marriage registration to compare those declaring as legally married by age and if they registered this marriage. So it was, if you could tell a bit about that and about the limitation of this estimation. And lastly, the third paper reviews the application of demographic method to assess the completeness and quality of Tunisia, the registration system and the cause of death record. This is an excellent and detailed report that analyzes the legal framework, the business process, the quality and completeness of the registration in Tunisia by age, by sex, but at national and subnational level. So all that we can look for for this information. And I want to ask just a few technical questions to the authors to better read some of the results. So when applying the distribution method to estimate completeness at the national level, how do you define the remaining life expectancy in the open age interval group? And do you consider international migration in this estimation? Because the method gives high completeness at national level and does not correspond to the proportion found at subnational level, with other methods, of course, show later on. So if you identify this difference as only reliant or related to the DDM assumptions, or maybe migration, internal or international, is also playing a role. I'm asking because I don't know about internal or international migration in Tunisia. So other things that the paper implies that an important proportion of the garbage code is concentrated in women of reproductive age. At the same time, well, you acknowledge that the completeness of the causes of death by sex is difficult to measure because the proportion fluctuates through the years. And there is around 9% of cause of death data without assigning a specific sex in 2020. So do you think these two things are related, and could they be linked to later registration in male death, especially those for external causes that come from the judicial permission of burial? I don't know exactly the name of that. So what do you think about this difference? And well, finally, I would like to take the opportunity to add to all these interesting results presented today that assessing inequalities related to the CRVS experience by subgroups of population continue to be a neglected area of study. producing, but also the usage of the vital statistics to analyze the event of people living in rural areas, isolated areas, or border areas, minorities, indigenous people, migrants, no citizens, refugees, stateless people, continue to be a big challenge nowadays. From my own research, I would like to highlight the Colombian case. Colombian CRVS system has considerably improved its completeness and overall quality. And Colombia has one of the highest proportion of under registration of birth and death in the Latin American region until very recently. And the completing of birth certification rose around 77% in the early 2000s to 95% in 2015. So Colombian vital statistics are nowadays available online in microdata with a 2-year lag only. And Colombia vital certificates recently include a question of self-recognized ethnicity. So huge advance we can see in Colombia. Despite all these significant efforts, some challenges remain. And around 95% of the individuals in the vital statistic declare themselves within only one category of the recognized ethnicity. So that could make us rethink these categories in the way that the question or the information is collected. And in the vital certificates, there is no question regarding parents' place of birth or nationality, nor disease place of birth, which make it challenging to study the vital events of the immigrant population in Colombia. This is particularly important for Colombia due to the large influx of displaced population arriving under very precarious conditions from Venezuela and Haiti. So promoting the study of subnational populations using CRVS as those presented today in this session continue to be really relevant. So thank you so much to the speakers for allowing me to comment on your interesting research, and thank you to all attendees today for the attention.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Maybe we can have a round first with each of the presenters in the same sequence of the session to reply to some of the comments that Jenny had. And then we'll take the floor with the chat, with the comments or the questions that some of you have already posted in the chat. And you will be able also to use your hand, to raise your hand also if you want to get to be able to speak if you want. So why don't we do first a short round with each of you, with Romesh first.
So just to clarify, Patrick, do you want us to respond just to Jenny in this round?
Yes.
Jenny and
Yes.
the chat window? Okay, just to Jenny.
Yes.
Great, and then we'll do the chat window next. So thanks so much for the comments and the feedback. Very, very helpful. I think you focused particularly on delayed registration of births, and I think that is a particularly complicated issue in recent times in China, but I think our own research is suggesting that in most other countries where gender bias sex selection is quite prevalent, under registration of births, particularly in South Asia, is a much bigger issue than the delays. But you did ask a number of very interesting questions around how to overcome this. I think it's important to note that the situation in China is quite unique, given the one-child policy, which was relaxed some years ago. And so I think we're all waiting to see what some of the latest birth registration data looks like in China, and then also what the most recent 2020 round of census looks like as well. But in general, like I'd like to draw attention to the lack of a culture of vital statistics production and dissemination. I think that's a key issue for why we're struggling here. Also, partly on delayed registration. One thing to note here is that we are only aware of two middle-income countries, two low or middle-income countries in the world, which routinely publish information about delays in birth and death registration publicly through the National Statistics Office: Brazil and South Africa. Three, Mexico as well. But for most countries, we do not have this information readily available. And so this is a key problem. And so I think we do need better standards and better ascension to publish these kinds of data and some of the related data around delays, so that the information can be analyzed comprehensively. You mentioned a number of things like reduction of fines and things like that. Those are very, very important initiatives to reduce delayed registration. I think, the world leader in this, it's in recent years has really been South Africa, where the government of South Africa introduced a child support payment to new mothers if and when they produce a birth certificate. And that has been transformative in terms of the completeness and the timeliness of birth registration there. But I think I'd just like to really emphasize this issue of a culture of vital statistics, which really needs quite a bit of transformation. And I see a number of comments from Laura Wong in the chat window, so look forward to engaging this in a minute. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you. Now let's go to Emmanuel with marriage and divorce.
Yes. Thank you, Jenny, for your summary of the paper and for giving us some things to think about. So your main question was on the limitations on the estimation of the completeness, especially taking into account that the different countries that we're looking at the same time, different customs and social norms in these countries. So yeah, there are a lot of limitations. Just to say that for the mere fact that there are different religious and social norms, especially in the sense that, say in countries like Armenia and Brazil, for example, taking these two countries, in Armenia, they are only they only recognize, or there are only two types of marriages, civil and religious marriages in Armenia. But when we consider, say, for example, Brazil, there are a lot of types of marriages that are there, Christian marriages, Muslim marriages, Hindu marriages, customary marriages. So when we're talking about marriage registration, the many types of marriages in the case of Brazil, for example, complicates the process of registration. And in that case, comparability between, say, Armenia and Brazil becomes also complicated. How do we compare a country where only two forms of marriages are recognized and a country where 3, 4, 5 forms of marriages are recognized? But aside from that, of course, there are other marriages that are not recognized in some countries. Especially when we talk about cohabitation and other marriage. For example, in South Africa, they do recognize civil unions and religious marriages. Up until recently, they have also started to recognize customary marriages, but they're still not recognizing, say, for example, Muslim marriages. So that also prevents the complete registration of marriages. But I want to point in terms of how these questions in the censuses capture the completeness of marriage registration. So in different countries, so there are 3 groups of countries, or in terms of questions on how they're asked in the census. So in some countries, the marital status question where they capture whether a marriage is registered or not, say for example in Armenia, the marriages that are considered registered are only those that are civil in nature, right? Religious marriages are not considered, are not registered. And that is also the case in, I think, Cuba and Costa Rica. So only civil marriages are registered. But when you go for when you go to see that was Ghana and South Africa, whereby customary marriages, religious marriages, and civil marriages are all legally recognized and registered, but levels of registration also differ between South Africa and Ghana. So in Armenia, there's no special question to say to capture, is this marriage registered? Because automatically in Armenia and say Cuba, only those marriages that are civil are captured as married individuals. The others are tried as either concession union or cohabitation. In Brazil, there's a specific question that is asked: is this marriage registered? Right? That is in Brazil, or in other in Senegal as well. They ask a specific question to say, is this marriage registered? So you see that they different practices in terms of how countries do capture whether these marriages are registered or not. So those are limitations that even to compare between countries becomes also problematic. So yeah, there are lots of limitations around that area. I don't know if you have answered the questions that we asked, but if Ramesh can add if anything that I've forgotten. Over.
Just to quickly jump in, Manuel, you were very comprehensive. I just did post some notes to the chat window, noting the variation in age eligibility in these countries which collect census marriage registration completeness data via this decennial census round. And actually all of the ones where we've been studying the data collect information from as young as 12 years and above, or 15 years and above. So so very interesting to see that even underage marriage is being documented. There's a larger question here as to whether respondents to the census accurately respond about marriage, underage marriage, and whether those marriages are registered. And I think that's an area which needs some further investigation. But the age eligibility certainly is quite expansive. Over.
Thank you, Ramesh. Can we get Sumaya to give some feedback on the experience of Tunisia?
Yes, thank you very much, Jenny, for your comments. So the first question was about the debt distribution methods. Yes, there are several limitations, and one of them was migration. We didn't take into consideration international migration or internal migration. So that is also one of the limitations and hindrances that weren't that we didn't abide by. There's another thing when you compare the national estimates with the subnational estimates. We also had limitations when we were assessing the subnational completeness. For instance, for the under-Lopez method, we needed the under five mortality estimates, and we only had access to the national estimates, so we used those on the subnational level, and we didn't use different estimates for every government. So those are some limitations for the death registration assessment. When it comes, I think your second question was about the difference in completeness between male and female, and if there's a link between registration for male deaths and the fact that we don't have the external deaths. the ones that come from unnatural deaths, their causes are not registered. And yes, this when we in our assessment we find that the male population aged from 15 to 49 is the one that has the less completeness levels, the lower completeness levels, and we can link that to the fact that we do not have access to the cause of death of unnatural deaths. We also can see that, for instance, for years like 2015 and 2017, where the National Health Institute had access to some of the deaths, some of the causes of deaths from unnatural deaths, male completeness is higher than female completeness. But when we look at years like 2020, when we do not have access to the external causes of death, or of the causes of death of unnatural deaths, then it is female deaths that have higher completeness than male deaths. Yeah, so I think those are the answers. Maybe I don't know if I captured all of the questions. Or if we also have present our colleagues from the National Health Institute, if they have further comments, or information has further comments. I also see, I don't know if I can answer, there was another question on the comments from Laura about if the higher garbage codes are associated to external causes, mental disorders, or maternal deaths. We can say that they are not linked to external causes, because like in our database for 2020, for instance, we do not have external causes. They are not in the database, and we still see higher garbage codes for women. When it comes to suicide or maternal deaths, actually, we do not. The coverage is very low for both mental disorders and maternal deaths. For mental disorders, we have very low coverage when we look at the numbers in our database for both males and females. And for maternal deaths, the cause of death data that we have only covers, for instance, in 2017, 2015, it only covered 4% to 8% of the maternal deaths. We cannot, we don't know exactly to what is that attributed, to what is this higher coverage percentage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sumaya. So during the session, there were, as you already replied for you, there were a few more questions or comments in the chat window during the session. Maybe Ramesh, if you want to say a few words to some of the questions or comments from Laura related to the sex ratio at birth, especially in South Asia, and the extent that some of the countries have been successful at going back to a normal historic level. And thank you to Alexandra Robinson for sharing some recent links to some research articles that have documented the South Korean experience in achieving this success. Ramesh?
Thanks so much, Patrick, and thanks, Laura, for your questions and comments and gracious words. A couple of points here. First is to say that we have a bit of a paradox in terms of certainly in India, the states where there are very skewed sex ratios at birth are the states often where birth under registration is quite high. And so we do have some serious limitations here in terms of really understanding in a more continuous and granular level whether there are real transitions afoot in certain parts of India and South Asia more generally. And so that's the first thing to note. But then the second thing is to perhaps reframe this a little bit, because your question talked about, you know, daughter aversion or son preference, and whether things have shifted now that there's more appreciation for the education and labor force participation of females. And I think it's also important to recognize, particularly in South Asia and particularly really in India, of a literature and demography on of neglect and systemic discrimination against girl children in the form of nutrition and health support and basic social protection. And we see, you know, much more neglect and adverse nutrition and health outcomes for, yeah, I think we certainly don't have the necessary data to really understand whether the transition is afoot in different parts of South Asia right now. But I also want to very much ask my colleague and co-author Alexandra Robinson to perhaps come in here. She's she's the global technical lead at UNFPA on this subject, and she's already shared some pieces from South Korea and elsewhere. But perhaps Alex, you could also engage this issue a bit.
Thank you, Ramesh. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. So hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Laura, I think an incredibly valuable question, and perhaps you know, I think that the important piece here is to go back to one of the first slides that Ramesh presented on, which was the drivers of GBSS, which are beyond low fertility and increased access to reproductive technologies, and is really around gender inequality. And so what we see in South Korea case study is that it was that social and economic revolution which really then started to provide the space for women and girls to participate equally in society and start to really address some of those structural inequalities. Similar to what we've seen in South Korea, we're also starting to see similar patterns in Georgia. So there's some really interesting analysis now coming out of Georgia, where we see that even though policies and laws which permit access to safe and legal abortion, we see strong patriarchal, patrilineal and patrilocal systems, which are all key contributors to the practice of GBSS. We are seeing a decline in sex ratios at birth back to a normal level. And that's largely because we're seeing policies which strengthen state institutions and social security systems. That would include, for example, addressing inheritance laws. And I think when we start to create laws and policies which are addressing those key drivers is when we start to see some shifts in the sex ratios at birth. So yeah, I do believe Dr. Laura Ram and Dr. Christoph Giamotto are also speaking to that experience in Georgia as part of this conference. I'm not sure whether they've already done it or not, but it's certainly a session as part of the conference, so maybe well worth checking in there to see some of the similar thinking. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I see also some comments or some reaction to Emmanuel and the rest of his colleagues related to marriage, also from Laura. Do you have any reaction to these questions or comments related to cohabitation and how the status of, let's say, whether it's a formal legal marriage or in countries that are the social protection system acknowledge and recognize customary marriage unions, basically have the same legal coverage, and the implication of what it means for registration of marriages.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Actually, I think that the examples you gave for Brazil and perhaps Uruguay as well, probably explain the low rates of marriage registration in Brazil. Yeah, because in most countries nowadays, they are now affording cohabitation the same rights as a legally registered marriage. So there's no really an incentive for people to go and register their marriages. I was reading an article on BBC where the judge, the couple were married for 14 years, but the marriage was not registered, and they recognized to say that the woman has rights to almost half the property. In that case where cohabitation is afforded the same rights as marriages are registered, then yeah, there's no really an incentive for people to register their marriage. That really contributes to low registration of marriages. Yeah, thanks.
Maybe Patrick, I could come in on that question also, if it's okay.
Sure.
I think one of the things to emphasize here, in addition to Emmanuel's excellent comments, is that marriage and divorce registration are not only, neglected areas of research, but they're perhaps neglected areas in terms of just the strength of coordination in many countries in terms of the civil registration system. We see that, the collaboration between ministries of health and national statistics offices and civil registries are fairly well developed in many, many countries. It's really the Ministry of Justice in many countries which is responsible for the registration of marriage and divorce. And the linkage there between the Ministry of Justice, the Civil Registration Authority, and the National Statistics Office is often weak. And so this is an area where UNFPA is doing quite a bit of work and accelerating our work. Because I think, as you pointing out, Laura, there are real questions here in terms of public policy to support the livelihoods of all people in marital unions and gender equality, and the actual statistical practice in terms of official statistics and what we know or what we don't know. And I think this is a major gap, which we welcome contribution and collaboration here, because it's a very lonely space. Everybody's very excited about death registration and excess mortality in an era of COVID, but not many people are really working on the importance of marriage and divorce registration and marital union recognition and gender equality. Over.
Thank you. There is one more question from Jordan for Sumaya related to cause of death data, especially at the subnational level, and whether you focus on children or adults.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I hope that you can hear me well now.
It's okay. You are a bit far, but it's the reality. Okay. But I hope the translator can hear you.
Okay. So the question is about if there is sufficient data for if there is for subnational analysis of specific mortality. So yes, the data we have assessed if the data is representative of the Tunisian population in terms of age, sex, and subnational and subnationally, and it is. So the cause of death data is representative. In our assessment, we looked at the whole population with different ages. Now, if we want to study this with a focus, for instance, on maternal death or perinatal deaths, maybe one should look at the maternal and perinatal death surveillance system. They have data that is more detailed. So for that kind of research, would the data differ by age? Yes, the quality of the data differs. Again, when we have looked at the completeness, we saw that that male population aged 15 to 49 had the lowest levels of completeness. When we looked at quality, we saw that women at reproductive age had a higher, were attributed a higher garbage codes. So yeah, so there is room for more studies. I would like to invite Ramesh. I don't know if he has further comments, or colleagues from the National Health Institute. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes left in the official time slot, so I don't see anyone raising virtual hands, or I'm not sure about physical hands. Oh, I see Emmanuel has a hand. Yes, please, Emmanuel.
Thank you. I just wanted to pose one question to the first presentation by Ramesh. So we saw that the sex ratios in Vietnam were overly biased in some of the regions, especially in the northern regions. I was wondering, first, the question is, when were the data collected, and if there is something more to sex selection in those data? Over.
Thank you. Let's see if there is anyone else who has some additional clarification or questions. Sumaya, do you have any questions for any other panelist? Or Ramesh, do you have any question for any of the other panelists? If not, if you want to reply to Emmanuel for now.
Happy to reply to Emmanuel, and happy to hear whether Jenny Garcia, our excellent discussant, has any follow-up responses to our responses to her discussant comments. But on Emmanuel's question, the geospatial map that I showed is a synthesis of data from the 2019 census and the last couple of household surveys in Vietnam. But it's really driven the data, the estimates that I was showing are mostly driven by the 2019 census, and what we've done is some validity checks and consistency checks to see whether things line up with previous evidence in Vietnam. I think one thing to note with Vietnam is something quite exciting, is that the improvement in the birth registration system in Vietnam has been quite has advanced quite a bit in recent years. And so I think we're and the latest estimates in terms of birth registration completeness are about 97%. So I think, you know, what we're looking forward to is working more with the Vietnamese statistical authorities to really evaluate the phenomenon in some of these hotspot areas using the recently available high quality birth registration data. And I think Alex, perhaps I can ask Alex if she wants to come in on this one, because I think the ramifications here for policy engagement and program design in more subnational areas are quite profound. Thank you.
Maybe Ramesh, if you can just clarify related to some of the previous discussion and comments of the experience in some of the other countries. Historically, Vietnam used to be, and I'm not sure if it has changed in more recent years, a relatively patriarchal inheritance system where whether it's the land or housing, the inheritance was basically mostly through the men. So women typically were not inheriting properties, or so when in countries where you have this cultural legacy and eventually even legal situation where women historically have not been able to have equal rights, especially on inheritance. It drives and motivates eventually in many situations the registration or lack of registration or for all kinds of civil rights for women. Over.
Thanks for the question, Patrick. I must admit that I have studied this kind of issue more in relation to death registration than birth registration in terms of inheritance rights. And we've seen this play out quite profoundly in Morocco, where we've estimated that the death of a female is only half as likely as that of a male to be registered, particularly in rural areas, because of this patrilineal, and it's related to this patrilineal inheritance tradition, whereby there really isn't much of an incentive, particularly given that in rural areas of Morocco, one needs to actually travel quite a bit of a distance and register, notify, then register, and then certify a death. But perhaps again, maybe we could call on our Alex Robinson, our thematic expert here on gender-biased sex selection, to engage questions around the cultural context in Vietnam, please.
Thank you, Ramesh. Yeah, I mean, I think Vietnam, like other countries as well, what we see is regional variances between the practice of sex selection, both prenatal and postnatal. And Vietnam is one example. India, the same. We see really high concentrations of GBSS practice in some areas and not others. And a lot of that relates to opportunities for women and girls. So again, we push back to this understanding of what the drivers of the practice are, and where we see increased access to socioeconomic opportunities and education, we start to see a lower level of practice. But again, it's highly localized and does require, I think, in addition to an understanding or use of the statistics in that area, but localized surveys on what we would call knowledge, attitudes, and practices surveys to really understand, both from men and women and young people, around the social and gender norms which drive the practice. Thank you, Romain.
Jenny, any last words, any reaction to any of these questions or comments? We have reached more or less our official time limit, but I think we can still have a few minutes if you want to have the last word for this session.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Robert, for the suggestion that I can add some comments to. I just wanted to add something to that Ramesh said, because it was actually key to this session, that we need to promote a culture of usage of this vital statistic, especially at subnational level. What we found sometimes is that the National Statistic Office, they send the information to the international organizations, but this information is not available for the country. It's not available in their website, it's not available in the books, it's not available for people to use inside the country, or to the local governments to use it. So I think promoting the usage of this statistic at subnational levels will be key to put some additional extra pressure to the national office to publish these figures more regularly. So thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Ramesh, if you want to have any last words related to the Converge initiative at large that goes beyond this session, if there is any important announcement or information you want to share with the rest of the group about other sessions of this conference that are still happening in the coming days.
Sure, thank you. Well, yes, Converge is an ongoing initiative and we're expanding to more countries, and we'd love to have more collaborations with academic researchers and policy researchers. Again, there's a lot of work to do here, so please get in touch and let us know if you want more updates. The other thing is that there are a couple of sessions I'm presenting again. We're launching a special journal issue tomorrow, actually through an IUSSP scientific panel, which relates to some of the work that we've done through the Converge initiative on strengthening civil registration and vital statistics. And then lastly, another piece of work which was done through the Converge initiative, which Sumaya and myself are presenting, I think it's on Friday, if I remember correctly, actually looks at a broader issue of legal identity, proof of legal identity coverage, and what we can learn from available demographic data, particularly from censuses, and whether there are gender-related and socioeconomic differentials in the access to proof of legal identity in different countries. And so I guess if you look up, I think I'm the lead author on that one. So if you look me up or Sumaya up on the participants list, you'll be able to see the session number. But really want to encourage colleagues to reach out. This is an active area for UNFPA, and we'd love to enrich in collaborations with members of IUSSP and the broader population science community. And last word is to really thank both our discussant, Jenny Garcia, and our chair, Patrick Jalond, and the interpreters and the support team at IUSSP for helping us host this session. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody. Thank you. Have a good day and rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.